Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back. Welcome to Speak Up. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and I'm joined with Michael Volpe, an investigative reporter. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, today's show is a little different. It's off topic. It's basically about an incident with an individual who lived in Goffstown, New Boston.
New Boston. And
basically a whistleblower. And it's, as you said, it's a complicated story, but it's a really interesting web of information that you want to talk about today. And you flew out from Chicago
to do it.
And you took a bus to get here on the show.
Yeah. I think the story is that important. First of all, whenever people hear stories like this, they wonder, well, why should I care? All corruption leads to waste, which means higher taxes. So that's the main reason. All of this corruption that you're going to hear means you as an individual in New Hampshire paid more taxes because it made the government less efficient. Because that's what corruption is. It's an inefficiency at its bottom line. The story is about a guy named Gerard Beloin, who by trade was a roofer. And about 10 years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, he bid on a roof in the town near his, Goffstown. And in inspecting the roof, he found it was made of a material called tectum, which in his opinion made it very, very dangerous because the more moisture comes on it, eventually it just collapses. And so this material was good 20 years old. He took his concerns to the head of the school board in Goffstown, whose name is Dr. Craig Heber. Explained to Dr. Heber what the problem was. Dr. Heber was very receptive and said, we're going to investigate this fully. I'll keep you updated.
So this is on a bid that he won?
No. He would eventually lose, but at this point he hadn't even finalized his bid.
Okay.
What he believed that because this was made of tectum, which the more moisture seeps in, eventually it caves in. What he said was at some point this roof's just going to collapse.
Okay.
And then I think the roof was on top of the gym, so if kids are playing basketball, it would
during an ice storm, it could
correct.
Be
it would be a nightmare scenario based on what he described. That was his opinion as a roofer, not just as anyone. So he took his evidence to Dr. Heber, explained it to him. Dr. Heber said he'd look into it. Within 2 months, Dr. Heber died under circumstances today that aren't really explained. He died of something called Ards, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome. I think that's what it's called. It's a catch-all term. What it means is that your lungs get filled up with gas. One way is if a bomb with gas was in it, that you'd get Ards. But that doesn't mean that's what happened. Nobody knows what happened. A lot of different reasons. The people that were doing his autopsy screwed up. The people at the hospital screwed up. And this is all the subject of a lot of civil lawsuits. So we're not sure why Dr. Heber died. But once he died, Kerry Stekowich, who at the time was on the school board, became school board president. Gerard put in a bid. His bid lost. Another bid won. Gerard says that his bid was lower and better, but be that as it may, whether it was or not, he didn't get the bid. He kept it.
May I interrupt you right there? How big was this bid?
I think it was between $5 and $6 million.
Okay.
It was a healthy project for whoever got it. Absolutely. This was not like a $50,000 bid. This was between $5 and $6 million. So he lost. He continued investigating because he believed that there was something bad going on. In about a year, the warehouse next to his office burned to the ground in about 3, 4 in the morning. And even part of his own office got burnt. And very suspicious. In fact, the fire marshal called it a suspicious fire. And that made him nervous that what he was investigating was riling people up. At that point, he started tape recording. Go ahead.
Is that documented that it's a suspicious fire?
Yes. Not only is it documented in the news story, I wrote a story about this on something called Crime Magazine. If you go to crimemagazine.com, it's called The Whistleblower. We actually quote from the news story where the fire marshal says, "We're still investigating people. We're calling it suspicious now." And I mean, the fire happens at 4 in the morning. It burns the entire warehouse down. So by nature, sounds suspicious. You're not supposed to have fires at 4 in the morning on a building that's at that point vacant that burns to the ground.
Was there a final conclusion though?
I don't want to say it. I'm not sure.
Okay. But at the time it was suspicious. But
it was actually quoted in the newspaper as suspicious. Okay. I mean, I'm documenting from the newspaper. At that point, he started tape recording himself. He tape recorded his landlord, the guy that owned the building where he had his office, a guy named John Janigan, who suggested that if he doesn't stop investigating what's going on with the bids, that he may die. And this is on tape on the internet. There was a guy, he didn't name him by name. He called him an informant that said words to that effect. Other people. And Stekowich's name came up in these tape recordings. And so it's not exactly clear what, if anything, Kerry Stekowich did. However, he seems to be in the middle of it. He was the school board president. He was the town prosecutor. So he seems to be in the center of power. So he then at some point within the next 2-3 years, he reached out to several people that discovered the same kind of similar bid rigging in other states. There's a guy named Doug Wicks, who's out of New Jersey, a lady named Diana Weiss, who's in Indiana, a lady named Kathy Campbell, who's in California. And looking at all the evidence, they believe they discovered a bid rigging scheme where people that have inflated bids get the contract. And that costs tens of millions, billions of dollars. Nationwide, who knows how much it costs.
And people get kickbacks, obviously.
Correct, and they get kickbacks, correct. And Wicks, as part of his investigation, I think it's the New Jersey Crime Commission did a report. In Indiana, Diana Weiss won. She was nominated for an award. Campbell, I don't know if she was nominated for an award, but it led to effective change. In Indiana, they changed the law because of things that Diana Weiss found. And she believes it's the same thing that he found. But instead of being celebrated he calls himself a taxpayer watchdog, which is true. You know, instead of being celebrated as someone, look, I found this scam costing the state $10 million, he began to be targeted. He developed a series of tapes. First he uploaded them on the internet, and then he took them first to the Hillsborough County prosecutor, because that's his county.
And who was the prosecutor at the time?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. It's not off the top of my head. I don't remember who the prosecutor was. But then eventually took it to the AG, who was Kelly Ayotte.
Okay. At this time in history, where are we looking at? 2000, 2005?
Probably 2005, 2006. So he took it first to the county prosecutor, then to the Attorney General's office. In the Attorney General's office, he met an investigator named Michael Behan. And Behan told him, and I believe this is an exact quote, "There's nothing here. Kerry Stekowich is a friend of mine. If he's involved, there's no problems." Behan has his own history. He let go of a judge that wound up being on America's Most Wanted. He has his own peculiar history. So it's interesting that he was the one that was investigating it. Eventually, Beloin himself was charged by the Hillsborough County prosecutor for illegal wiretapping. The way they charged him was he was taping people without their knowledge. And in New Hampshire, that's illegal. If I tape you, I've got to ask your permission.
Right.
His response was, the people I'm taping are committing crimes on tape, which, if you listen to the tapes, is absolutely, there's evidence of people threatening his life, of people trying to blackmail him, trying to extort him. And so and he always represents...
Are these
on tape, where they're saying, either you let this go or harm will come to you.
Where are these found?
These are on his website. I've linked to them. I think it's GB for Congress.
GB for Congress. So he ran for Congress.
Right, correct. The last time he ran for Congress. You can find them on his website. They're all over the place. And I've listened to all of them. Unless he was able to doctor them, people on those tapes are threatening his life, telling him, you better stop investigating this or something bad is going to happen. They refer to Dr. Heber. Dr. Heber, now he's dead. You know, it's hard to read that any other way. but either way, he gets charged with illegal wiretapping. It turns into a long legal case that takes a couple of years. Eventually, he sort of gets convicted of the equivalent of a slap on the wrist, spends a day in jail. But as a result of that, he then gets on probation. Within about a year and a half of that, he walks into one of the courts. I think it's the Hillsborough County courtroom. As he's going through the metal detector, he puts his computer bag through the metal detector. There's a gun. He's arrested on the spot and put in jail. And then the judge gives him, I think, started out with $75,000 cash and eventually gave him no bond. And this is for carrying a firearm into a court. You know, it's not murder. You know, he actually pointed out there was a murderer that got $2 million bond, so he got more than the murderer.
Right.
Then that case went through. The prosecutor wanted him give him 2 months.
Who was the prosecutor?
That name's not in front of me either. But the judge in the case, and her name is Diane Nicolacci, and she gave him 7 years. He wound up doing a year and a half, and he just recently got out of jail. Recently, as right, within, I think, August, at the end of August, he got out of jail. And so that's where the case is now. And so, you know, he says that he was targeted for warning people, which, you know, as you track the case, if there's another explanation, no one's given it to me.
Right.
He found the bid rigging. He brought that evidence along with the threats first to Hillsborough County prosecutor, then the Attorney General's office. Instead of having that be investigated, he was investigated. And the other thing, the illegal wiretapping charge. This is important. Now we're going to go back, I think 2005, 2006. It wound up in... I want to interrupt just for one thing, and it's really for full disclosure.
I had no idea who was involved with this at this time. And for the viewers, I want them to know that I do know Kerry Stekowicz. And it's important because this is not an attack on him from my perspective or from anybody's, but I've known him personally, and I've never, as a person, and as I told you off camera, I've always found him to be a very pleasant individual, and I've always thought him to be an honest person. And I'm welcoming this conversation just because, you know, you're here to bring forth the facts. But this isn't a personal attack from me or from anybody else. This is just somebody who is talking about the issues. There's nobody actually pointing a finger at him. But there's something that needs to be explained. And
correct.
That's what we're bringing.
In cases like this, when you have circumstantial evidence like this, a lot of times it may mean a lot. It also may mean something you don't realize. So it's not clear what, if anything, Kerry Stekowicz did. The only thing that I know for sure is that he was a member of the school board, became school board president after Dr. Heber died, and at the same time was the top cop. He was called the Goffstown prosecutor, which is the main cop. That's the only thing I can say for sure. Which
is it possible something could have happened prior to Hebert being, well, Hebert was the president, or?
Anything is possible. From what I understand, he was a healthy guy. His death is very peculiar. This is like a mid-50-year-old guy who's healthy, doesn't smoke, doesn't do anything that should kill him, who suddenly dies of a very rare and obscure way of dying, and no one explains how. Essentially, gas filled up his lungs until the lungs gave way. Well, that doesn't just happen. But no one, this is almost 10 years ago, no one can tell anyone why the gas got into his lungs. So we don't know exactly what was happening. Gerard Beloin is convinced that there's bid rigging going on in the Goffstown school district. If that's proven, whether Stekowicz knew or not, he's responsible for it as the school board president. But the bid rigging's almost become a side issue because of what's happened to him. So let me tell you.
You have a death, an unexplained death. Then you have an unexplained burning of a building. Then you have people actually threatening him, which he has on tape. So now he's out of prison. Where do we go from here?
Well, the committee you were a member of, I've talked to several members of the redress committee, and this was back before the election. They wanted full hearings. They want everything. And there's one other important, because this spreads from the prosecutors to the Attorney General into the courts. he was initially charged with this illegal wiretapping. There was a judge named Judge James Berry, who it wound up in his court. Berry dismissed the case with prejudice. And what that means for those that don't understand legalese, if you want to bring that case up again, you have to have new evidence.
Okay.
Because what the judge is saying is, what you've given me, there's nothing here. I'm dismissing it. If you want to bring it back, there better be something new here. There's with prejudice, without prejudice. If you dismiss it without prejudice, you're saying, I'm dismissing the case, but I'm not giving my opinion of the evidence.
Just you can bring it back and try to read.
Correct. With another judge, with me. That's not what he did. He did it with prejudice. They refiled. No new evidence. It winds up in Judge James Berry's court. And there's a YouTube video of Gerard saying, why don't you go ahead and dismiss it? You know, why should I dismiss it? Well, you dismissed it 6 months ago. And Berry says, no, I didn't. Even though there's documentation that he did. So there's a judge that has to explain himself. Why did you dismiss it with prejudice 6 months later, and it went through till he eventually spent a day in prison. And this was one of the things that members of your committee honed in on. Why did they keep refiling after it was dismissed? Why were you guys so? Because this wasn't a murder. This was a guy illegally taping somebody else. You know, why are you putting so many resources into this particular case? Normally, a case gets dismissed with prejudice. Even if you really want to convict the guy, you're going to move on. Because as a prosecutor, you have a lot of cases you don't have all the time in the world. You've got to manage your time. Why did you guys keep going after him?
So we're looking at a guy who blew the whistle.
Right.
Taped conversations of threats. Said, listen, there's some fraud going on here. There's some bid rigging. And instead of doing a simultaneous investigation.
Instead of investigating what he brought them,
they went after him.
He was investigating. And so if you're the average person, you don't know the story. Right now, Gerard Beloin has a fairly long rap sheet. I mean, you know, it's not like a criminal mastermind here, but he's convicted of illegal wiretapping, of bringing a gun illegally to court. He looks like a guy that you wouldn't trust.
Was it his gun?
I believe it was his gun, but
it went through the scanner.
Right, correct. But I mean,
either he's not too bright, or
let's think of what was he doing. He put the computer bag through the scanner. Either he knew the gun was in there and foolishly put it through the scanner, or he didn't know the gun was in there and he put it through the scanner not knowing what was happening. But either way, he clearly wasn't trying to hide the gun.
Right.
He put the computer bag through the scanner thinking everything was all right, even if he knew the gun was in there. I mean, so what's he hiding?
Right.
So, but if you're looking at it from the outside, he looks like a little bit of a criminal. So when he's telling this story, well, it's not a guy that's not necessarily trustworthy, and that's the sort of thing that happens to whistleblowers. The other thing that happens to whistleblowers, not a lot, but it happens, and it happened to him, is they try to get you in front of a psychiatrist so that as a psychiatrist, they can, as an expert, say he's a little crazy. And they tried to do that with Gerard. Gerard was smart enough to tape all of these sessions, so the psychiatrist never actually said he was crazy. But I've seen it happen before, and it's been used against whistleblowers, and they're thought of as, now they're not thought of as crazy, but I mean, if a psychiatrist said, they don't say you're crazy, but they give you a determination. Now it's, you know, somebody with bipolar, somebody with this, somebody with that. Again, why would we want to listen to them?
I got a wise guy question to ask you, though. But did the psychologist know he was being taped?
Yes.
Oh,
and
he did? Okay.
And you can see it on the tape that he's very careful with his words because he's being taped, and he had to. You know, the guy that brought this to me was a guy named Jim Murtaugh, who blew the whistle on corruption at Emory University. And there's Murtaugh spelled M-U-R-T-A-G-H. If you Google his name and a guy named Peter Downs, who worked for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, in 1999, Downs describes how Murtaugh was put in psychiatric care and what they did, and how these psychiatrists found him crazy. So that way, Emory had lever. You know,
who ordered the psychologist?
I believe it was
Was it Judge Berry, or?
I don't know if it was the judge. I think it was the Department of Corrections or the Department of Probation. It was a part of the process of being in jail and being on probation and all of that. But and I've seen this too. That's not a standard order. And I've seen people put in the psych wards as it's a means of punishment, number one. So it sends a message, you know, if you go and blow the whistle, this is the kind of stuff that happens to you. And more importantly, it's a way to marginalize you. as the whistleblower, you're crazy, essentially. So who cares what you're saying? It doesn't matter. And I see this kind of stuff a lot.
How many people have you approached with this story?
I've approached a number of people, both newspapers in New Hampshire. I don't want to embarrass anyone on TV, but in national newspapers, national websites. The place that published was a place called Crime Magazine, which writes just strictly about crimes. And the guy the editor is a guy named Pat O'Connor. He did a very good job editing it, making sure that it was all accurate. But and
they did publish the story.
They did publish it, and it's as detailed as you'll get of this story. Now, Gerard says he's written a book, and it's so nuanced. The only way to truly do it right is to do a book. But the most common response was that they thought he was a little crazy, and the story didn't make sense. And that's one of the problems. The story is so complicated that by the time you're done finishing it, it either doesn't make sense or they think you're crazy.
Okay.
Even though the tapes are out there. And I don't know if the people that
Who generated the threats?
The threats were generated mostly by a guy named John Janigan, who is his landlord, who would reference on occasion Kerry Stekowich's name, saying, I'm being sent. He didn't say I'm being sent by Kerry Stekowich. Not those specific words, but that's the meaning he had. And then another one is a guy that he didn't, for whatever reason, he's just referred to as an informant. Mm-hmm. And those are the two main people on the tapes. And Beloin's on the tapes as well. There's a point where Janigan essentially tries to extort him, and Beloin says, "That's extortion, isn't it?" And Janigan, "Yeah, that's why I'm trying to save you from this." "Yes, it's extortion," he's saying. "Trying to save you from this." Unless they're doctored, and if they're doctored, what that means is that you have a roofer who's an expert in video and audio. Those tapes are real, and there are real people threatening his life. And there's no other way to look at it. They're either doctored, and so the places I took this to, the guy at Crime Magazine listened to all the tapes, and I think that's one of the reasons he published it. Because once you listen to the tapes, you either believe they're doctored or there's something there.
Now, Crime Magazine, is it a national publication?
Yes, it is. It is. It's a guy that a lot of crime writers write for it, and they'll write a few articles, and then they have a crime book that they can promote, and that's sort of that was his idea. And there's a lot of crimes here. So yeah, it's not the New York Times. It wasn't read by 100,000 people, but it was well read.
Let me ask you again. Now, the people that are doing the bid rigging, mm-hmm. is there a particular company that where there's a you can say, okay, this company was involved with this bid rigging?
Yeah, and you're going to ask me a question I don't remember the answer to, but Doug Wicks especially. There's a number of different companies that do this, mm-hmm. and the bid rigging was so complicated, I can't explain the scheme. Okay. Which is why I said Gerard Beloin believes there's bid rigging. I can't. He explained it to me, and no matter how many times he explained it to me, I couldn't figure out the scheme. There's a number of companies involved, and really, if you Google bid rigging corruption, you're gonna. This is nothing new. It happens in almost every state. Like I said, in California, they found hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bid rigging, and it's mostly the same companies.
You're from Chicago, right?
And I'm from Chicago, yeah. Right. I don't know if we have bid rigging there, but we have all kinds of our own. But yeah, right. And so it's the same companies doing the same kind of stuff. And I don't remember. I didn't pull it. Doug Wicks, the report that they did based on his information is online as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember what you Googled to find it. Okay. But in that report, he explains not only the scheme, but all the companies involved. And it's not...
Do you know who was originally awarded, the final was originally awarded?
I don't remember the name of the company, okay. But it wasn't Gerard. He says that his bid was better.
But you got $5 million here, $5 million there. That's
correct. No. What we don't know is this a unique case? Mm-hmm. Is this spread through New Hampshire? If it's a unique case, $5 million, and maybe the scam is $1 million. If it happens throughout the whole entire state, you're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions, $1 billion.
Right.
And it goes from our kids. Well, first of all, it goes from our taxpayers and our kids into the pockets of corrupt contractors, politicians. So, because this is school money that you're using. So yeah, no, absolutely, it should be investigated. If it's just in Goffstown, that's good. If it's through the whole state of New Hampshire, that's billions of dollars that the taxpayers are paying.
Now, you got a book.
Right.
What is the name of the book?
The name of the book is called Prosecutors Gone Wild, The Inside Story of the Trial of Chuck Panici, John Gliottoni, and Louise Marshall. That was a lot to get out. It's a story that happened near where I live. I live in Chicago. And Chuck Panici was an important person in that area. He was in Chicago Heights. He was the mayor. He was also a very powerful committeeman. And in fact, he's one of the most powerful committeemen in the history of committeemen. He could get out more votes than anyone else. In the late 80s, Chicago Heights, you have to know Chicago. Chicago Heights has a very long history with the mafia. In fact, in the 20s, there's houses in Chicago Heights that served as routes on when they were doing black market alcohol that would wind up going to Al Capone. In fact, Al Capone not only spent a lot of time in Chicago Heights, partially because of that, but then he developed friends there. So very long history with the mafia. So in the 80s, the federal prosecutors centered on a mafioso named Albert Tacco, who was the guy that ran things, if you will, in Chicago Heights and near Chicago Heights. He's probably the most famous mafia person in the Chicagoland area not named Al Capone. Very fascinating guy. They eventually charged him and convicted him of like 300 crimes, wound up dying in prison. From that investigation, they started investigating Chicago Heights City Hall. They found a guy named Nick LeBoux, who was his finance commissioner. They piled on so much evidence on LeBoux. I mean, this was as airtight a case as you can get. They got him. They charged him with 5 RICO counts and a bunch of other counts. He was looking at 30, 40, 50 years in prison. He might have died in prison. He gets charged in 1991. He starts cooperating with the feds. After a little bit of cooperation, they drop all the charges against him, put all those charges on Chuck Panici, and they're all the same charges, and he goes from being the target to the main witness. Now, no physical evidence tying Panici to anything. In fact, you know, they said that he took $700,000. They could not find it on his taxes. Somehow he made $700,000 disappear. They said he took gold, he took cash, he took bonds. Can't find any of it. So he became the main witness. They also recruited 2 other witnesses. When I say recruited, and I go through this in the book, basically they did the same thing they did to LeBoux. LeBoux was staring at a lot of jail time. And it's almost like a wink, wink, nod, nod. I wasn't there for the conversation. The conversation goes like, you know what we want. And he knows what they want. They want the big fish. In prosecution, that's just how it works. If you're a federal prosecutor, you want to make a name for yourself, it's not Nick LeBoux, the finance commissioner of Chicago Heights. It's Chuck Panici, the mayor of Chicago Heights, one of the most powerful politicians. He hosted Ronald Reagan. He hosted Jim Thompson, who was our governor. He hosted George H.W. Bush. He hosted, and thousands of other politicians that you wouldn't necessarily know about. But I mean, he brought the president of the United States to Chicago Heights. This is a 30,000 person town. You know, it's ultimate working class. Why would the president come here? Because of Chuck Panici. So you bring him down and you make a name for yourself. So they recruited LeBoux. They recruited a guy named Donald Prisco, who was the mayor. It's called South Chicago Heights, which is a town of 4,000 people. So it's like the small town next to it. Mm-hmm. He said one time, I remember giving Chuck Panici some money on a bribe. All out of the blue, all of a sudden. And then a guy named Ralph Galderio, who is the most interesting guy. Ralph Galderio was lifelong friends with Chuck. So they'd known each other since they were 8 years old. Now Chuck calls him like a black sheep. He's basically a guy, doesn't really know much, can't be really successful on his own. Chuck helped him throughout his life. And he repaid him in his 60s by, in my opinion, lying and claiming that he exchanged money on bribes with Chuck, even though, again, none of these guys had any evidence. In the book, there's hundreds of examples of discrepancies. And let me just give one before you ask the question. So there was a liquor license bribe. You know, how cliched, right? A late liquor license, there's a bribe. Bribe is $4,000. It was supposedly Chuck Panici, Nick LeBoux, and Ralph Galderio. Ralph said the bribe was $4,000. He got 2, Nick got 1, Chuck Panici got 1. So the first question is, why is Ralph Galderio getting twice as much as the mayor? But the next question, LeBoux gets up on the stand. They ask him what the split was. He goes, we went to Vegas. Now, I find it hard to believe that they're telling the truth and could remember it in such divergent ways, where one guy is specific, and he goes, I'm sure I got, in his statement, I'm sure I got 2,000. I'm sure Chuck Panici got 1,000. And I think Nick LeBoux got 1,000. Nick LeBoux said, we went to Vegas. So, you know, if there's a reasonable explanation besides out and out lying, I'd love to know how the two.
How did you get involved with this case here in New Hampshire?
Jim Bertaw is his own case is legendary in the whistleblowing community, and he can't speak about it because he made a deal with Emory where they paid him $1.6 million, but as part of the deal, everybody had to be quiet about the case.
Emory.
Right, Emory University, which is a very, very, my brother went there, which is actually how I started investigating the university. But Emory University, it's called the Ivy League of the South. It's in Atlanta, Georgia. It's the most powerful institution in the city of Atlanta. 30–40% of CNN are Emory University graduates. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, he's a very famous graduate of Emory. So he, they paid him, they paid him off, if you will. But that's not how they describe it. But they gave him $1.6 million, and now this is all public information. But both sides had to be quiet. So he doesn't speak about his case that much, but he's become an advocate for whistleblowers. And I'm not sure where the two of them met, but at some point they met. And Jim said, you should talk to Gerard Beloin. He's got his own great story, and he does. And
so he's the one who brought this case to light.
Right. He did, I want to make it. All Jim did was give me a name and tell me to call Gerard Beloin. Gerard Beloin brought the case to light. But yeah.
Now he's out of jail, and is he going to pursue this?
Yes. There's something. Once you become a whistleblower, you really don't stop.
Is he out of business?
No, I don't think. I don't want to say whether he does well or not, but sometimes when I call him, he'll say, "Listen, I'm bidding on a job. Okay. I don't have time." So he does do work. I don't know if he makes $500 or $500,000, but he started his business back up. So
but he's going to pursue this and try to bring this to light.
Right. He'll stop pursuing this when he dies, in my opinion, because once you become a whistleblower, you truly become a whistleblower, then you can't, because if he stops now, then that means the last 10 years of his life have been for what? For nothing.
Right. And he believes there's more corruption going on.
Right. Well, if you look at it, so you start with the bid rigging, then you have prosecutors on the county level and the state level, and there's no question Kelly Ayotte and her predecessor, but there's no question she knew about it, and I'll tell you why. When I contacted the governor's office, they sent an email to me, and the email was, we know Gerard's case, Gerard brought the documentation to us, and we gave it to the Attorney General's office.
Now you have that in writing.
Right, and an email. Right, and so that's 2000, so she had to know it. Now,
is there a reason why she didn't pursue it?
Only she can answer that. But, maybe there were powerful forces, maybe there was no, if there was no evidence, if the evidence he gave her led to nothing, she should just say that. Look, we have these people on tape. It's not enough. We couldn't gather any more evidence. If that's the case, then I think if that's the case, she probably would have said it, but maybe that's the case. But look, I asked for a comment, and she gave me no comment. So
doesn't the Attorney General's office spend more time defending the state rather than...
Maybe. But look at this case. Here's a guy that brings you, here's my evidence of bid rigging. Here's all these tapes of people threatening me. Now you'd think that's pretty good. And here's like an average citizen. The average person would think the Attorney General's office would investigate that, not investigate the person that brought that to you. And even if you couldn't bring any charge, let's say the problem was this isn't enough, and we have nothing else. We can't find any other evidence, and maybe it isn't enough on its own. And maybe they couldn't find you. That doesn't mean you investigate the guy that brought him to you.
Right.
And what did they investigate him for? Illegal wiretapping? When they have on tape people threatening his life, even if technically...
And that's what he was guilty of,
right,
wiretapping the people threatening him.
Right, even if you think technically he's guilty, there's something called prosecutorial discretion. You don't have to go everyone hard. I did a...
Was the people that he taped, were they looked at for the threats?
Obviously, maybe not. If they were, nobody told me. They didn't. If there was an investigation, I found no evidence of it. Now, I wouldn't necessarily find evidence of it unless someone leaked it to me, or unless the Attorney General's office gave it to me. And so neither of those happened. So maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But that's another thing, is the Attorney General's office has not said very much about this. They haven't said what they investigated, why they investigated. They haven't explained why they investigated Gerard Beloin so long.
Did Gerard file a petition with the state?
For redress, you mean? Yes. In fact, the committee was supposed to take it up in January. In fact, I talked with a number, this was back in the summer now, I love the look, but I talked with a number of committee members in the summer who were gung-ho, and
May I ask you who you talked with?
Yeah, George Lambert was, he was, I don't know if I'd call him gung-ho, JP, I think it's J.R. Hole.
Representative Hole, yeah.
Yeah, he was very, I think gung-ho is a bad term, but when I talked to him, it was clear they understood the details of this case in a way that most people don't, and they understood there's something very wrong
So
here.
one of them were going to be the sponsor?
Correct. Yeah, the way they told me was that at this point they were out of session. When they come back into session, they were going to introduce this. They want a full investigation. They're going to subpoena people. I said, are you going to call Kelly Ayotte? We intend to. They intended to. I don't know if any of this will happen.
As you know right now, the Democrats are in charge.
Correct. And, like we talked about beforehand, if the Democrats were looking for angles, if you wanted to embarrass Kelly Ayotte, I mean, it would turn into, she's the biggest name. And, and I wrote in the article, she's the biggest name. She's not necessarily the main culprit. She may not even be a culprit. But I think, at the very least, when this is laid out, she has to explain, why did you follow up on what he brought you? And why did you allow? And she did allow. Even if it was the county prosecutor bringing the case against Beloin, she's the attorney general. And
now we have another attorney general. Has this been brought before the current attorney general?
Listen, Gerard Beloin, there's almost no one that Gerard Beloin has not talked to about this.
And has the current attorney general,
current
Delaney,
attorney general's office didn't respond to me at all. So I can't tell
Kelly
you what.
hasn't, and Delaney hasn't.
Correct. Of all the powerful politicians in the state of New Hampshire, the only one that gave me a response was the governor's office, and it was self-serving response. Oh, we know about this.
Who's that? Governor Lynch?
Right, but it wasn't. It was his spokesperson. But yeah, the statement was, we know about this. We brought it to the attorney general's office, which is that's fine. If they did, and I don't. Let's say they did. Did you do anything? Did you follow up? All of this stuff, it's like anything else. If you just bring it to the Attorney General's office, nothing will happen. If you really wanted it investigated, you'd follow up, you'd stay on top of them, you'd call once a week, you would demand to be updated, and then they'll investigate it. If you just brought it to them and said, hey, some guy brought this to our office, you should look at it, a lot less chance that they'd look at it.
If this were brought before the Redress of Grievance Committee, then they would actually take more. People don't understand this being a new committee. We would actually ask these questions and say, okay, you said such and such, bring me the evidence. We would look at the evidence and we would match it up with the claim.
Right.
And then we'd say, okay, this is credible or this is not credible. And that's what the findings of the Redress of Grievance did. And then they could either subpoena or ask for a subpoena with the Rules Committee, and then follow up from that point on.
Right.
And I fear right now that committee will no longer be.
I don't want to say it's his last chance. It's not his last chance, but that seemed to be very promising for him. When I spoke with members of the Redress Committee, they had seen some of this evidence. They had to have, because they were pretty well versed on the details of the case. Their main issue, they want to know, why did he get charged with wiretapping, have it thrown out, only to have it brought back?
Who influenced who?
Right. Why did this happen? It's
right.
I don't remember the exact quote, but one of the members of the committee said normally that would be the end of it. So we want to know, why wasn't it the end of it? Why, if it was dismissed with prejudice, why did the prosecutor's office bring it back up?
Can you tell me where the location of that tape is?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's GB for Congress, I think, 2012.com. He has them all. He has them on like 3 or 4 websites.
Is he going to run for office again?
Probably. He's like he's a David versus Goliath.
Right.
He has a story to tell, but it's very hard for a guy like Gerard Beloin. And I've dealt with I just started speaking with a guy named Jamil Shaw, whose son was killed by an illegal immigrant in California, and he's thinking about running. when you run on a single issue, it's difficult.
Right.
But you know, even if he can bring this to light, I think that also helps. So yeah, I think he's almost like become addicted to running for
the
office.
fact that you've captured Representative Lambert and Representative Hull's attention, they're very.
And I didn't. He did.
They're very.
Or somebody did.
Very respectable state representatives, stellar in my mind. They don't take on things lightly, and they do investigate. They're very brilliant in their investigations, and that causes me great pause because if what you're telling me, and I will actually follow up and find out, you know, what their perspective is, there might be still some other options, because I know that there may be if there isn't an actual committee for the redress of grievance, there might be some other alternatives.
There might be others.
And we're actually
right.
working
I
on
didn't do anything. I mean, I wrote the story, but when I talked to them, they were well versed on what's happened. Right. So it wasn't me that got them to see this.
Right.
So I don't know if it was Gerard. I assume it was.
Do you know if it's gone before the Rules Committee?
I don't know if it's gone before any committee. From what I understood from every member of the New Hampshire legislature that I talked to, was at the time that I spoke to them, there was nothing they could do because they were done with the session, and whatever they were going to do was going to start in January. They may have chosen the redress committee because at the time it seemed like the most obvious place. So maybe now people are looking at different options. But hopefully it seemed like it was finally going to be.
Is there another committee that they can go to?
I hope so. I mean, there's so many different aspects of this. You know, I don't know enough about the New Hampshire legislature. I know that when I've dealt with cases like this, and I speak to congressional committees, I'm always amazed by how many ways they can find to not investigate stuff. You know, when you have complicated corruption, it spreads through all things. You know, this could go in front of the budget committee, because if you're saying there's bid rigging, that's a budgeting issue.
Right.
This can go. I don't know if you guys have a criminal justice committee or something to that effect, and go in front of the finance committee if you see this as a finance issue. You know, if somebody wants to investigate it, they'll find a way to investigate it as part of it.
Depending on who's doing the investigation.
Correct. And that's what I've generally found. Especially when members of Congress tell me that my committee doesn't, that means you don't, 99 times out of 100, that means you don't want to investigate.
You might know somebody who does. So.
Right.
Hey, how can people get in touch with you to find out more about this?
Well, if you want to read the story, it's on Crime Magazine. It's called The Whistleblower. My email is mvolpe998@gmail.com.
Say that again? Slower?
It's my first initial, my last name. It's spelled VOLPE. The number is 998@gmail.com.
At gmail.com.
If you want to email me, I can answer questions about this, about any other stories that I've done. And I want to mention one other thing. You know, people don't realize this, but when you become a whistleblower, it's very hard on you mentally. And
because you're all alone.
You're all alone. You're also, you know, you're constant. You know, most of us, we wake up and we're thinking about whatever's happening that day and the next day, and it's always different. When you're a whistleblower, you can't. It's like you're stuck in this world and you can't get out of it. And so, you know, he's gone through. You know, people don't appreciate how much Gerard Beloin's gone through in the last 8, 9, 10 years, and people like him all over. And a lot of it is because when you blow the whistle, there's no one there to help you. And so you are going through it alone. That's the worst place to be, because you get the entire government, all of it on top of you.
You're taking on City Hall.
Right. Or, you know, the guy that they made the movie about, The Insider, he took on that, you know, or you're taking on the entire private industry.
Right.
And so it's very difficult, and people don't realize that. And whistleblowers, and there's a lot of them, they struggle through psychological issues. Right. Some of them kill themselves. I still know a doctor down in Texas. Her husband killed himself, and you know, we'll never know why. But I believe it's because at some point he realized, my life is horrible. It will never get better. They're always going to pursue this. My wife's not going to stop this, and so I'm just looking at this never-ending terror. And he finally snapped, and that's the sort of thing that can happen.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, Speak Up, and we hope that people interested will get in touch with you, and we'll get to the bottom of this eventually, I'm sure.
Let's hope so.
And again, it's Michael Volpe.
Volpe.
And email one more time.
mvolpe998@gmail.com.
Right. Well, that's it for this week on Speak Up. You know, it is a difficult time for people. I know personally that when people want to speak up, they're afraid. There are many people that have wanted to come on this show, but for some reason they're either afraid that they'll either lose their children or some bad things will happen. This is an ongoing thing that I'm seeing on a regular basis. But please, if you feel as though you have an issue that you want to talk about, you can come here and we'll listen. And we'll help in any way that we can. We're not afraid to speak up, so please. And if you want to sponsor the show, please contact me, Kevin Avard, at speakupnh@gmail.com, or email me. Again, I just said that, didn't I? So please, contact me. All right? Until next week.
Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up. To stand up and fight back.